Hey everybody, welcome back. Here we are for the children's sermon yet again, sitting in our favorite chair with a cup of tea and the Jesus Storybook Bible. This week our story is called God to the Rescue. This is about how God rescued the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. It's the story of Moses being called to lead them and the 10 plagues. There's a lot of good stuff in here. We'll also hear about the Passover. And that is a very important celebration for our Jewish brothers and sisters. They still celebrate the Passover today. And this story tells about where that celebration comes from. Let's get right to it, shall we? This is a great story. We're going to read it together now. Here we go. God to the rescue. Joseph and his brothers grew old and died, but their children's children stayed on in Egypt, where they became a very large family. Later on, a new king began to rule, but this Pharaoh didn't remember Joseph, and he didn't like God's people. He made them into his slaves and beat them and made them work harder and harder. God's people cried out to God to rescue them, and God heard them. He remembered his promise to Abraham. He would look after his people. He would find a way to set them free. One day, Moses was looking after sheep when something caught his eye. A bush was behaving very oddly. It was flickering with flames, but its leaves weren't burning up. He took a closer look. "Moses!" boomed a big voice. Moses leapt back. The bush was talking to him. "I have heard my people's cries," God said. "I have seen their tears, so I have come down to rescue them. Go to Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go free." Moses was afraid, but God said, "I will be with you." So Moses went to Pharaoh. "Pharaoh," Moses began, "God says—" "God?" said Pharaoh. "Never heard of him." Moses kept going. "God says, let his people go free." "Why should I?" Pharaoh said. "Don't want to. Won't." So he didn't. So God gave Pharaoh 10 warnings, called plagues. First, God turned the river Nile into blood. No one could drink the water. But still, Pharaoh would not let them go. So God made frogs come hopping and leaping and jumping. In your bed, frogs in your hair, frogs in your soup, frogs all over, everywhere, frogs. "Make them go away," Pharaoh screamed. "Then your people can go." So God took the frogs away. But Pharaoh changed his mind. "You can't go," he said. Then God sent zillions of gnats, but still Pharaoh said no. So then God sent swarms of flies buzzing in your eyes, flies. And after that, sickness and horrible boils and huge hailstones and a storm of locusts, then darkness when it should have been day, until it seemed that the whole world, creation and everything, was coming undone, falling back into darkness and emptiness and nothingness. But each time Pharaoh said, "Make it stop, and then I'll let you go." And each time when God made it stop, Pharaoh changed his mind and said, "Actually, no, you can't go." Finally, Moses warned Pharaoh, "Obey God, or he will have to send the worst thing of all." Pharaoh just laughed. So God said, "The oldest boy in each family of Egypt must die, but my people will be safe." God told his people to take their best lamb, to kill it, and to put some of its blood on their front doors. "When God passes over your house," Moses explained, "God will see the blood and know that the lamb died instead of you." That night, it was just as God had said. Suddenly, piercing the darkness, echoing down the corridors of the palace, came a blood-curdling scream. Pharaoh's oldest son had died. At last, Pharaoh did what God said. "Get out!" Pharaoh shouted. "Just go!" And so, that very night, Moses and God's people fled out of Egypt and out of slavery. They were free at last. God's people would always remember this great rescue and call it Passover. But an even greater rescue was coming. Many years later, God was going to do it again. God was going to come down once more to rescue his people. But this time, God was going to set them free forever and ever. There once was a religion professor who loved teaching people about God and the Christian faith and helping everyone better understand the ways that the Bible worked and the ways that everything fit together. There was just a problem. One year in his class, his students were particularly disrespectful. They would fall asleep during his lessons. They would text on their phone and play games rather than listening to his lectures. And as much as he would try to be animated and excited about what he was teaching, to really get the class engaged on all the wonderful things that were happening, the students would continue to goof off. And they would mess around, building towers out of books and shoving them over. Things got so bad, they got truly ridiculous. Truly ridiculous. Eventually, the professor couldn't take it anymore.
You guys aren't listening or paying attention at all. What's going on? Come on. Do you want to know everything there is to know about your Christian faith? Do you want to know what really matters? So you're all so smart. Don't need to pay attention. Let me just tell you, here's the only thing. Here's the one and only thing that you need to remember and realize.
The professor drew a big down arrow on the whiteboard and walked out of the classroom, and the students knew they'd made a big mistake. But the next day, the down arrow was still on the board, and the professor walked into the room to explain his drawing.
Did you figure out what this means? This is it. This is the synopsis of our whole Christian faith. The thing about our Christian faith that we always have to remember is that God always comes down. God is always in the business of coming down to be with us. We never work our way up to God. No, no, no. God always comes down. All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Did you like that story? Yeah. I love the way that they say it in the Jesus Storybook Bible. It talks about how God comes down to rescue the Israelites. And then it tells us at the end that later God's going to come down again to rescue God's people. What they're talking about is how Jesus came from heaven down to earth to rescue us, to bring us salvation and to show us how to live each and every day. That's the message of our faith. God always comes down, just like we saw in that story that I told you with the whiteboard. God comes down to be with us. And so here's our homework this week, because we want to put our faith into practice. We believe that God always comes down to us. We never have to work our way up to God. God comes down to be with us and to care for us and to save us. And so as a result of that, we're then compelled to humble ourselves for others. Humble is another way of saying come down, go down to someone's level. So I want you to think this week about how you could help someone else. And maybe you can help them in a way that's humbling, right? That you are going down to their level. Maybe you've got a younger brother or sister and you choose to play with them. Even though there might be something more fun to do, you come down to their level to care for them and be with them and play with them. Think about it. I'm sure you'll be creative about it, but find a way to humble yourself in order to serve somebody else. Because after all, that's what God's done for us. And so that's what God calls us to do for one another. I'm Pastor Nate. This has been the Children's Sermon. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great week. Bye-bye.